Martin, and welcome to another episode of the San Francisco Conservative, the new podcast series featuring yours truly, Tom Martin. I'm a lifelong journalist, ABC News, Good Morning America, CBS News, CNN, and many others along the way. And I love asking thought-provoking questions and learning new things. And that's exactly why I'm here. In delivering on that promise is our co-host and man of the hour, Mr. David Parker from San Francisco. David is the author of two amazing books, wonderful books you should purchase, Income and Wealth and The San Francisco Conservative. And his third book will be available very, very soon. Hey, David, how are you today?
I'm fine, Tom. How are you doing today, Tom?
I'm doing well. Always a pleasure to connect with you. I always come away learning something new, and I'm sure today will be no exception. It's funny, we're right around the start of a fresh new year. I always get excited this time of year. Some people make New Year's resolutions and so on. And I know there are, some people are not thinking about their finances at all because that's just what they do or fail to do. Other people are probably a little bit proud of themselves as they listen to all these economists who say, okay, everybody, we're headed for a recession. It's going to be a rough year. What's your response to that kind of thinking?
Well, I appreciate the fact that almost all economists are in agreement that a recession is just around the corner. You can bet there won't be a recession if all economists are in agreement. All the recessions we've had in the last 50 years, not one has been predicted by an economist. And for the first time, they're all in agreement that one is just about to happen. You can bet it's not going to happen. The supply chain is going to ease up. It's been a year now since COVID or more, and inflation will come down, prices will come down, interest rates will come down, and there's pent-up demand for people have a lot of money saved from COVID from not spending for 2 years, not traveling. That's a big expense. Not going to restaurants, another big expense. People have money, and government gave people a lot of money, and everybody is working. I don't see a reason for a recession.
I can't help but notice that I think you just used a dirty word. We don't usually hear that from you, David, but you used the I word, inflation. Is that really what we're dealing with, inflation?
Everyone calls it inflation, and that's probably a useful word. I don't call it inflation. We've had supply that's been suppressed that forces prices up, and we have demand that's been suppressed and that forces prices up. I see it as natural market function. Prices a function of supply and demand, and so prices up, and you could call it inflation, but inflation is really when the government prints more money than at a rate higher than the rate of birth. If the population is increasing 2% and government increases the money supply by 3%, inflation, because that money is all over the place and everybody has it in their hands and they're outbidding everybody for products, and that causes prices to go up.
So if we are, that's interesting. I guess I've never heard that. That is interesting. And I guess we can certainly hope that our elected representatives can handle if we are, it sounds like we're not really heading into a recession. This is not really inflation as it's properly defined. But whatever the economy does in the coming year, I guess we can hope that our president handles it as well as FDR did in the Great Depression way back when, right?
You said a lot there, Tom. FDR did not handle the Depression. Many people believe he caused the Depression. The Depression was after the stock market crash. October, I believe, 1928. 29, 30, 31, 32, that was the Depression. Roosevelt campaigned in 1932 with all the good things he was going to do to bring us out of the Depression. He was going to take charge. He forgot to look at the graphs. The Depression was over. at the beginning of 1933. But he was so excited about his New Deal, about bringing socialism to America, he couldn't wait. And the Supreme Court vetoed everything he wanted to do as unconstitutional until finally he says, I'm just going to pack the Supreme Court and throw out checks and balances. We're going to throw out American government as we know it, and I'm going to take charge. I've been talking to Mussolini, and the Nazi newspapers have been congratulating me and finally understanding fascism and authoritarianism. And I'm going to take care of this economy. And the Depression turned right around, and unemployment went higher than it did during the Depression. It went as high as 25% at one point. And it stayed at 15% for 10 more years. And he pulled in the money supply instead of expanding the money supply. I sound like I'm a nut, but let me tell you that Paul Krugman, Nobel economist, agrees. He said that the Roosevelt was partially responsible for that. But they didn't do the right thing. All economists agree on that. A little bit late, 50 years, 70 years later, they agree that was the case.
Interesting.
Let me add recessions we've had, like 2008, the financial crisis. Maybe most people know about that. That should have just been a recession that would last 1 or 2 years. That recession lasted about 10 years, and the economic growth, I predicted, would last another 10 years, a 20-year resolution for that 2008, because government stepped in, is going to help the citizens, and they bailed out the banks. During COVID, they bailed out citizens. All that does is prolong recessions. You try to eliminate austerity by throwing money, but you prolong the situation. Government shouldn't enter in the lives of its citizens. Is my main theme in all my writing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I just want to pause for 1 second for those of you joining us midstream here. This is a San Francisco Conservative, the new podcast series featuring author David Parker in San Francisco, of course. And I'm Tom Martin, your co-host. Despite the bridge over my shoulder here, I'm in Connecticut, but let's just keep that a secret. A lot of helpful information, again, to put things in perspective for the new year, David. Also, I'm prompted to ask, one of the themes of your great book, Income and Wealth, is personal responsibility. And one of my favorite motivational speakers, I guess you could call him a motivational speaker, passed away a few years ago, Jim Rohn, R-O-H-N. And he may not be the only fellow that said this, but he said, we all have the same conditions, the same wind, the same water in our little sailboats, and it's how we set our sails that makes all the difference. So if we're heading into a interesting year, whether it's a recession or just other natural challenges, do you have any advice for people as far as how they handle those conditions? You're so great. Again, everybody's always talking about your chapter on if you're a minimum wage worker, you really can create financial independence. Any words of encouragement in terms of taking personal responsibility in the new year?
Well, my Income and Wealth is a little bit of a gospel of some basic principles. And one thing is to every year make a purchase of an income producing asset with leverage for 10 years. Buy the house next door, buy the house next door, buy the corner grocery, buy a fleet of trucks, whatever produces income, and not worry about what the economy is. There's a famous Lynch's name, I believe, from Magellan Funds. I heard him speak once on stocks. You don't look at the economy. Every year you have your program, just buy. Market may be up, the market may be down. You can't control that. It's not even worth thinking about because it's not going to stay up forever and it's not going to stay down forever. And most of they'll all average out if you keep it up for 10 years. He also said don't buy stocks, more than 1 or 2 stocks, unless you're a professional stockbroker. Buy a stock of a product that you use. The minute that product is faulty, something's wrong with that company. In real estate, just buy the house next door. You live next door. If something's wrong, you know something's wrong.
And if and when it comes to the price you pay for that house next door, if someone's not an experienced real estate investor, do you have any advice on whether they're paying a good price?
Don't worry about the price. Pay 5% more. Make sure you get the house. If 10 people are bargaining for the price, they're all paying about the same, that's what it's worth. You don't have to think. You don't have to ask an appraiser. If 10 people want it, that's what it's worth. It's pure supply and demand. The best return on investment you can ever in this country is real estate or is residential property in rent-controlled cities. That rate of return is the highest you could possibly ask for, because that's such a abuse of the twisting of the market. Rent control. It's handling a symptom and not handling the underlying cause. So rents are raising too high, so they control the rents. That's the symptom. The underlying cause is the supply is far less than the demand. And they're not changing. They're not building 100,000 houses in San Francisco or 500,000 houses in New York. They're not doing that. So that rate of return is going to be exorbitant. So don't worry about the economy. Don't worry about a recession. There's no recession coming up in the future. I promise.
Excellent. You heard it here, folks. Remember, I appreciate that. So, David, I know in some of our conversations we've talked about your predictions. You had a great prediction on the presidential election 6 years ago, and that kind of thing. Heading into a fresh new year, do you have any predictions you'd like to make?
That's it. There won't be a recession.
Yeah.
I do have some predictive ability. I wondered once if it was psychic, and I was in New Orleans, and I was in the above ground graveyards, and I went on a tour, and they were pointing. The person leading the tour was a psychic, and she points out houses. A psychic lived there. A psychic lived there. That's a very New Orleans thing to say and do. And I says, "Well, am I psychic?" She says, "No, but you have predictive ability." I told her a little bit how I did, and some people have that. You have that. I predicted 6, 7, 8 things that have been major, and I haven't been wrong.
Amazing. Great. Well, do you have any plans for the new year yourself? As far as I know, you said be consistent in your plans and so on. I don't know if the real estate picture there in San Francisco has been up and down, cyclical to any degree. But just curious about your plans.
San Francisco's a rent-controlled town, so the demand will always outpace the supply. The prices, just haven't come down, or if they do, they don't come down very much, and they bounce back right away. So I'm a professional investor, so I'm looking at office buildings. Nobody's looking at office buildings. I'm looking at office buildings. I believe they're going to come back not quite as office buildings. They'll come back in a very mixed use format. There'll be a grocery store on the 4th floor, and there'll be residential. There'll be housing in office buildings, and there'll be offices, because offices still have to exist. But if you had a 25,000 square foot office, you don't need that anymore. A 5,000 square foot office, so you have 20,000 square feet sitting there on that one floor, maybe, or in that building. So it'll get used for something else. There'll be a wine shop. That's the future of offices. Or I'm thinking also, lawyers do much better when they get together and have one secretary for 4 or 5 different offices, just answering the phone, doing the photocopying, because they don't need space. They need 200 or 300 square feet. All they need a room, and they can share a conference room. That's the future of office, all kinds of offices. But the lawyers, especially, because They need someone to cover it when they go away for vacation.
Yeah. Yeah, I was gonna ask you about that with all of the talk. I talk to people from time to time who write books about leadership or creating a great office environment and so on, and then we see expressions in the news like the Great Resignation. Some people said, "Well, you told me to go work at home, in early 2020 because of COVID. I don't really want to come back." What do you make of that kind of shift? It was interesting what you were saying that about the lawyers, for example, more people working from home or being untethered, with their computers, stuff like that.
Offices will be part of the future. You need to come to an office sometimes to meet a client face to face. We're not wearing masks anymore, so you need to meet a client from time to time. But that's it, from time to time. You don't have to be at your office every single day, 8 hours a day. So that office can be shared with many other people. The very same space can have 4 or 5 companies in that very one space. And some companies want their employees to come back, and they're fighting it, and they're not coming back. So that probably is the future. It's not going to be full time in the office, but the office is not going to go away. And then when there's confidence again, and when they figure out how to use those office buildings that are sitting, especially in San Francisco, vacant.
Yeah,
Vacant everywhere. In some smaller towns in the Bay Area, I have an office building in Walnut Creek. I didn't have one vacancy during the whole COVID period.
Wow.
Not Silicon Valley people. It's mom and pop offices.
Yeah. So it's interesting in New York City, not far from where I live. They have something called Silicon Alley, which I guess is tech companies, startups, incubators, and so on. And so a number of years ago, I went to visit a shared workspace, kind of like the WeWork concept. Ariana Huffington was speaking. She just come out with a new book and so on. And it was interesting to me. I mean, most of the people who had rented offices in that shared environment were a bit younger, younger than I was. But it seemed that there's maybe some advantage to, rubbing shoulders with people working on different projects, that exchange of ideas. I was just wondering, what you think of that kind of situation.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Every business, Silicon Valley, for example, or Silicon Alley, or law, or anybody, or stores, merchandise, clothing stores, they all want to be together, near each other, because they feed off each other. Owners talk to each other, employees talk to each other, and you want to know what other companies are doing. And if they're right there, you can talk.
Yeah.
Africa is an example. There's a book I dislike. It's called, I think, Guns, Germs, and Steel. Jeremy Diamond talks about the beauty of Africa has 1,000 languages. Or I'm not sure he said that, but that's the fact. Because Africans did not go next door and see what the other village was doing. How do you plant soy or taro roots, or what are you doing? What kind of plows are you using? That's never the case in Africa. If you went next door, it was to start a war with that village and kill all the men, women, and children. And no universal language of commerce ever sprang up. And this guy Jeremy Diamond says it's because the New World was so separated from Europe, it never developed. That's nonsense. One person had to get on a boat and drive over there. Oh, here's the old world. They're gonna come. They'll be here in a few years, and they're gonna destroy us in 5 seconds. Nobody from the New World went over to Europe to see what's cooking. So they got wiped. They got Darwin. They got wiped out.
Yeah, no, very interesting. Very interesting. I just can't resist adding one more question along those lines before we close for today. It's funny. My friend Tony Robbins, the motivational speaker, said, when we had our education experience, and you, of course, David, were a great teacher for 40 years of young children, and they're in the public schools. So in the schools, often we were told, sit at your desk and don't talk to your neighbor. And Tony has said, if you don't talk to your neighbor, you're out of business. That's that's not really preparing people for real life or the future. I was just wondering about, did you run your classroom that way as well? And what do you think about maybe we should teach our children to talk to their neighbors?
Yeah, they should. Children need playtime for that reason. And children who grew up in the country very often become the best in their fields because they weren't being pounded with writing essays all day long and studying and not talking and not speaking up. Because academic learning is part, maybe it's half, but half. The other half is developing judgment, developing experience of thinking on your feet. And that you get with play, that you get from making up games as the kids are running around unsupervised and making mistakes and falling off logs and stuff without your parents watching you. You need that. I read a statistic that 35% of America's or the world's great CEOs are dyslexic. That comes from Cass School of Business Management in London. Because from the minute they have to start to read, probably in the first grade, they're 5 years old and they're having trouble, they start to fake it. And they look for friends who they can count on to help them. And they very, very quickly, they're making hundreds of decisions from they're 5 years old. I can count on that guy, can't count on that guy, maybe I can count on that guy. So they become, and they know, they listen to the teacher. Teacher keeps saying that, just put that on the test. The teacher wants to hear that. They don't care about the right answer. They want to hear you regurgitate what they're saying. They're just flatter their ego. They get really smart at that from a very young age. So by the time they're adults, they've made thousands and thousands of decisions on the spot using instinct and judgment.
Interesting. Yeah, and I keep extending our time here, but I can't again resist throwing in. I have a friend who hosts an interview show focusing on CEOs. And he said it's interesting that there's a high percentage of CEOs who are dyslexic, more than the general population. And it seems to me that maybe it's that reason that you just shared with us, that you learn who your friends are. You need to develop some kind of a network to succeed,
Yes, no, what it really is that to run a big company, you need to delegate.
Yeah.
Ted Turner, for example, would be an example of a dyslexic. He's running 3 or 4 companies, huge companies. I think Charles Branson, dyslexic, is running several companies at a time. Because you have to delegate. And how do you delegate? You better choose the right person.
Yeah.
They've grown up learning to choose. They have that ability to delegate. Well, that's part of their success.
Very interesting. Well, I think we will end it on that note. As far as choosing the right people, I feel honored to be a part of this little venture with you, David. And
I chose you, Tom. My instinct is correct.
Thank you. And I know that we're both grateful to our audience for listening, and we encourage you to send notes and ideas, and because these conversations are for you, are done with you in mind. And as far as enlightening our viewers and our listeners, I must encourage you to pick up copies of David's books. You can do that by going to davidparkeressays.com or by going to Amazon. So any last words, David?
I like to think that my essays are interesting. That's a word that sticks in my head because I give examples of every problem we're having today throughout history. That's kind of what my books are about. And you read the Greeks, 5th century Athens, you read 1st century Rome, you read 18th century Age of Enlightenment. They're talking the same thing in the same kind of voice we are, with the same solutions that we have. That should make us all feel better, less anxiety. What we're experiencing has been experienced throughout history. There's nothing new. Nothing by final words.
Yeah, good point. Excellent. Okay, well, great to see you, and thank you very much. Look forward to the next time.
Great.